Welcome to the Sport Management Office Hours. Always excited to bring you a new episode. I am Brandon Podgorski, Director of Sports Leadership at Abilene Christian University. And as always, we have Dr. Nick Zoroya with us, Assistant Professor of Sport Management at Madonna University. And very excited to have Dr. Nels Popp on the show with us from University of North Carolina. He is an Associate Professor of Sports Administration at North Carolina. And I believe you're also a director there of a research institute. Is that right now?
We do have one here. I think on some website somewhere I was labeled as a co-director, but
Okay.
kind of relinquished those duties. So I'm the director of our graduate
Okay.
studies in our department here, but that's just another title. So
All right. Well, we're excited to have you. If you've done any research at all in sport management, especially on a lot of the things on the revenue side, you've come across Dr. Popp's work. I have his book back here, Selling in the Sport Industry, and Dr. David Pierce is a good colleague of mine, and has cited you quite a bit as I start my literature review for my dissertation. So excited to have you on the show, and we're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about research in sport management and the process. How do you get that published? You know, things somebody like me who's just starting to get into this needs to know. So first, just kind of walk us through maybe from an initial idea to how you get things published, how that works, and why did you choose kind of you've done a lot on sports sales and revenue. Why did you choose that?
sure. Well, first of all, I should probably say before I went for my PhD at the University of Louisville, I had no idea this research component of the job even existed. I didn't quite understand that balance. I kind of just stumbled into it. I just thought I wanted to teach the classes and run from there.
Yeah.
But since starting a PhD program, I actually really enjoy it. I love that side of the job, and so I've and obviously a place like here at North Carolina, there's a lot of pressure to produce publications. So I've had to really step up my game on that side, but I like it. I think it's a lot of fun. One thing that you realize pretty quickly is it's not a fast process. I think in other industries, if you work for a marketing agency or for a team and you wanted research conducted, you have a turnaround of maybe a month. Like you want to get this data analyzed and move quickly. The publishing process takes a lot longer than that. That can be kind of frustrating. One thing I've learned having to do that, to produce more publications is that you can't just start one project and see it from beginning to end, wait till it's published, and then start the next one.
Mm.
Um, I have at any given time probably five, six, seven different projects that I'm kind of juggling to some degree at any one time. Um, and that's not, I'm not trying to brag. It's just it's what you have to do to keep the pipeline moving. Otherwise, if you just wait for that one, it could be months or even years before you actually get to see that in publication.
So how did you come up, or why did you decide on sport revenue development, sport sales? Did you have a background in this before you started in your PhD program or in academia?
Yeah, it's a fun question in my opinion because I didn't. I actually worked in media relations before I got into the academic side of things. My wife was in sales, not in sports, but in media and advertising. Um, but my dissertation in my PhD program was on the experiences of international student athletes. I had a chance to work in Australia for a little while and had helped a couple of student athletes come from Australia to play here in the US. And I was fascinated with the idea. Guess who else is interested in that? Nobody. The more I talk to people, particularly people in industry, I wanted to do something practical that people wanted to look at and read. And almost everybody I talked to in industry said, well, tell us how to make more money. Tell us
Yeah.
about revenue generation. Tell us about selling our product. That's what we want to know. And so I made a pretty significant shift early in my research career to really focus on the revenue side of the business because it's what I thought industry really wanted. I've learned to really enjoy that side of things, but it wasn't because of my background. It was because I wanted to not spend all this time on research and have nobody even care about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So using it practically, I love that idea.
Yeah, I want to jump in real quick because I do feel like there are projects that I look at and I say this is of actual use to industry, and this is a good research question, but it's really just geared towards the other people studying theory, and it just theory begets theory, and it's just it really adds to that conversation. But practically, I wonder how much usefulness there actually is for that in the sports industry because there's this, I think there's a very distinct division between sports management theory and applied. And a lot of people, when they think of sport management theory, it goes straight into sports sociology and coaching and all of these things.
Mhm.
And then there's research like what you're doing, which actually applies to the business of sports. And so I guess, do you have any pressure or, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but how did you feel comfortable making that decision to go in this direction when a lot of people in academia are really more focused on that theory side as opposed to the applied side?
Well, I guess what really drove me was one, I want to help students find jobs. That's still what drives me no matter what. And I know you guys are the same way. And so the more I talked to people in industry, this seemed to be an area that they were really concerned about. Second, I just in having these conversations, I would hear things occasionally. I'm like, wow, that would be a great project. And if you're talking to, say, a minor league hockey team, they don't have the capacity or the the resources to really dig into a particular issue. So that was when the light bulb kind of went on for me that would be something that would be great to explore, and maybe I could serve a usefulness in that regard. So that's probably another thing that kind of drove me in that direction. I love when we come up with a research project where it stems from a conversation I had with a practitioner. Um, I'll give you a great example. We were back when I was teaching at Illinois State, we were talking to the GM of the minor league hockey team in town there, and they were trying to figure out if they should move from I can't remember what division they were to up to the AHL or down a level to the USHL, which is kind of the amateur league. And they were trying to figure out, well, what impact would that have on attendance, on revenue? And I said, that's a great research project. And we actually dove in and looked at across the board what was likely to happen, what would our model predict would happen. That turned into a great research project. I was talking to our athletic director down there one time, and he said that he was thinking about selling stadium naming rights for their arena to a corporation. And I said, what do you think that's worth? He said, I don't know. I said, that would be a great research project. So I love digging into those kind of things. I also think you have to at some point understand you have to spend a lot of time understanding what other people's problems are. And I think it's easy if you just go the theoretical route. It's what I'm interested in, what I'm thinking. But I feel like to really be useful to industry, you have to spend time getting to know people that work in that field or talking
Yeah.
to alums or organizations. And until you really understand their problems, it's hard for you to produce research that's going to be a help, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think you just explained it in a way that I was struggling to figure out how to explain this to people that aren't in in the academy. Because when I talk to my friends, which I'm the only professor that I know outside of people I work with and my professional network, I try to explain to them like why research is done on certain subjects and not others. And the way you just described it, where if you were to do it the other way, the theoretical way, it'd be stuff that you're interested in. And that is so true because when I look at all of my friends in the academy that do a lot of research, a lot of it is just based off what do they care about? What are they interested in, regardless of the real value add to the industry. And then there are others that are like you that focus on how can I marry the two together? Like, what is something I'm remotely interested in, but that can also solve a problem or also be very useful in the short term instead of, hoping that this theory one day just gets 100 citations. So I think you just explained it really, really well. And I appreciate that because I was really struggling on how do I explain to people why certain topics, like, why did I just write a paper about this? And I don't know whoever's going to read that as opposed to this paper that I think is extremely useful to the 10 people that will read it. But, at least there was value there. So a follow-up question to that whole line of thinking is, so when you in particular are taking one of your projects near the finish line, obviously one of the things you have to do is select a journal. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do. Can you kind of go through your thought process on how you select your journals?
Yeah, I think you have to be realistic and understand who you are, what your research is, and not have a false sense of how important it is or where the fit is. Um, I do not have a lot of publications in our top tier journals in our field. I will readily admit that. One of the reasons is because I do a lot of research in college athletics. International journals aren't always interested in US based college athletic
Mhm.
studies. I can admit that. I'll be upfront about that. There are certain journals where there is less interest in the um, the practitioner side of things, the more applied studies, and some journals that are more into theory. I've I've gotten enough rough reviews that I realize, maybe that's not the avenue for me, and that's okay. There are a lot of journals in our field. There's probably a spot where I do fit in, and I'm okay with that. I do think we sometimes get a little in the academic side, get too wrapped up in, I, I got to be in this journal or get this kind of number of citations. And I don't know, UNC has allowed me to move up to get tenure, and I actually just got promoted to full professor. So apparently it's doing enough to convince them here. But I try to find that, where do I actually fit?
I think that's important because, like you said, your university, it made sense. It works. I don't know that every university looks at it so practically. I think a lot of the massive R1s are so stuck on what does every department look like. And I do think sport management is one of those majors, departments, areas of study that is not like every other, it's not like biology, or it's not like any of these other ones. It actually may be better to be publishing in these, I don't know how to classify it, but I know which journals you're talking about. And I've read many times on, I'm on Reddit forums with other professors that it's better to get your stuff out in a mediocre to above average journal and have it out there in the world doing something than to just play the back and forth game trying to get it into one of these elite impact factor journals. So I think sport management does kind of get a pass sometimes when it comes to the administration because there's a difference between what is the most cited journals in sport management and what is the most impactful. Because citations, I mean, you might be solving a problem that's very important, but it doesn't mean it's very citable because who else is going to use that exact situation? So I
Yeah.
do sometimes think we get a pass and we're kind of playing the game slightly differently from the rest of campus when it comes to research, especially if we're going the applied route, which I know Brandon and I are big on the applied sport management as opposed to theoretical. So yeah, I do. And you've worked at a couple institutions. So obviously there's a way to make it work where you can play both, but I definitely see us playing by a slightly different set of rules when it comes to research.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's true. To me, if I can't take my research and talk to a practitioner about it, then I don't see the value in it. And so if I can publish in a lower tier journal, but I've shared my research at, Ticket Forum, a minor league ticketing conference, or NACTA, and I can talk to practitioners about here's what we found about ticket pricing or about sales development or whatever it is. To me, that's where the value is. And yeah, it helps to have some published research to back that up. But do practitioners care if it's in the Journal of Sport Management or the Journal of Applied Sport Management? Probably not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I think it's an interesting poll. You were talking about this just a little bit ago, Dr. Popp. It's an interesting poll with sport management because you're at an R1. Abilene Christian just got R2. We do have those research mandates that we have to do as part of our job, but at the same time, I think all of us got in this because we're student centered, and that's not to say that other majors aren't and other faculty aren't. It just seems a little bit more prominent in sport management just because these jobs are so doggone competitive. And us as professors, if we're not out making those connections to give our students a leg up, I mean, they're behind. And then all of a sudden, okay, now your students can't get jobs. Now they don't want to come to your school. And oh, yeah, we're going to put all this research burden on you. So I don't know. I kind of agree with Nick to a certain degree. I think sport management kind of plays a unique niche in higher ed when it comes to stuff like that, which I don't know if other majors are as competitive to get jobs.
Well, we're an outcome driven major.
Yep.
We, at least at most institutions I've worked at, we're not looking to develop more researchers in this field. We're looking to get people placed into a career. And so when we're outcome driven, that changes our priorities. Like Del said, he does research to solve a problem, but ultimately his goal is to get students employed. And so he marries the two together in a way that makes sense. Obviously, at a teaching institution like I'm at, like the only thing that matters is getting students employed. Now, I do research for my own reasons, but that at the end of the day, I think most of the industry is not looking to try to attract as many grad students into the PhD in sport management program as they can. It's most of the programs in sport management are looking to, again, be results driven, trying to get people placed into the field. And not every major has that direct pipeline that we do to a career. So they're not as outcome driven.
I'll also throw in there, I do think we're seeing this shift to an emphasis on data analytics and data analysis. There is a research component to the industry that is a valuable skill set. We have to figure out a better way to get students excited about that component of it and show the practicality of it. We run into this here in our grad program. We actually still require our grad students have to complete a thesis. Realistically, most of them are probably not that excited about doing the project and, what are the boxes I need to tick to finish this off. We've really tried to change the mentality to, hey, if you can do predictive modeling with business analytics, that's a career.
Yep.
And even if that's not what you want to do for your job, if you want to work in a college athletic department or for a pro sports team, you better understand how predictive modeling and analytics actually plays a role in the industry. And so to try to, it's not research for research's sake, it's research to try to get to an answer and be more efficient. I think there's room for us to do that. I don't think we as a whole have done a great job of that yet.
Totally
I'd agree with
agree.
that. Yeah.
And I think that's still developing to a certain extent. But I mean, if you get a student now graduating undergrad who's going into ticket sales, even as an inside tickets rep, but they understand all that that's coming from the analytics department that understands, hey, here's how we got this data. Here's how we kind of analyzed it. This is where we want to sell to, and this is where we want to go, and can actually kind of understand that stuff and that process. I think it gets them a leg up as I've gone through a sports analytics class and even learned stuff, even though I was on the corporate partnership side and used it. I'm going through this. I'm like, wow, I wish I would have known this in undergrad on how to compile and actually kind of present and use this data.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. I had a grad student a couple of years ago that's working for a marketing agency now, but he did his thesis on valuation of corporate naming rights for stadiums and arenas.
Mm-hmm.
He now does that for a job. And he was able to leverage that thesis project where he had to sit through the stats class and had to do a thesis. But now it's like, yeah, that's actually a valuable skill set. So I think there's a spot for it. I don't think we've done a great job of illustrating that for students all the time. And some aren't inclined to go that route. They're not numbers oriented. They're not a math person. But that I still think even just basic survey research. I mean, every athletic department, every sport organization should be surveying their fans, should be collecting data on their consumers and trying to glean insights from that. That's research.
And I don't think when sport management students hear data analytics, that's what they think of, the practicality of it. I think they think of statistics, like game statistics, looking at stuff I think they're so single-minded on like, that's what that means that they don't really understand how practical from a business standpoint, the rest of it can be. And I think, like you just said, that might be a marketing problem. And that might be as you've said earlier, that might be a great research topic, is for us to look at sport management education and look at, what do these students think data analytics really is, and how do we bridge that gap? And because they know it's important. I mean, even at my teaching institution, we require probability and stats for all of our sport management majors. And we have a management information systems class that they have to take as part of their core in the business major. So but the thing is, bridging the gap and making that sexy, that's a whole nother conversation.
We actually just talked last week in a meeting, like we have a class that's called graduate statistics and no one wants to take it. And we are going to change the name of it to sport business data analytics. And all of a sudden everybody wants to take it. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
it's essentially the same material, but yeah.
Through the lens of sport, all of a sudden people are interested.
Yep.
Well, let me get back to the topic of research here. And you kind of went through this and trying to find the right journal that fits what it is that you want to do. What are some of the other challenges, again, maybe for somebody who's just kind of starting that research process to actually get published in journals? And, for somebody who's new to this or hasn't been through the process quite a bit, what advice could you offer them?
Patience would be the first thing. It does take a little while before you kind of get your rhythm there. I do think initially it's very helpful to have some co-authors that you can kind of lean on a little more heavily and initially until you kind of get how the game is played. Um, there are certainly times where I get reviews back and I don't agree with them, but again, how the game is played, if that's what a reviewer wants to see, if I can make the adjustments to keep them happy, I want to get the paper published. That's the goal.
Okay.
So you live with it. It might not always be how you envisioned it, but that's okay. Um, I'm a big believer in trying to find, when we collect data, when we're looking at different projects, are there things that you can kind of double up or even triple up? I'll give you an example. We're working with the ACC right now in collecting market data for their championship events. So we're surveying fans that attend the ACC football championship or women's basketball championship. We produce a report for the ACC that says, here's what your fans are telling you, here's what they look like, and all those kind of things. But I always try to throw in a couple of extra questions in the survey that I can utilize. Is it really useful data to them? Maybe, maybe not. But for me, I know that's something I could get a study out of that was interesting. How willing they were used. This was a couple of years ago. We slid some questions in about using digital tickets when that was first kind of becoming a thing, and how people felt about it, or how people felt about selling alcohol at a collegiate event. That I know in the back of my head is a research question that I can actually dig into a little bit more. Um, so trying to think about things in terms of not, trying to double up or try to find multiple purposes for one, because it takes a long time to collect data. It takes a long time to, if it's a survey to get it through IRB, that takes time. If I'm going to go through all that work, how can I be more efficient with it and collect more than maybe what I originally thought? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Nick, I kind
Yeah.
of want you to follow up here because
Yeah.
playing the
I learned.
game is a Nick Zoroya special right there.
Well, I used that term actually last week because I do think it is a game, and I think you have to learn the rules, those written and unwritten. And I think finding a coach or a mentor is probably the most impactful thing you can do. Nels, I'm a little bit like you in the sense that I got into this and was excited to teach the courses, and then realized I have to do some research as well. And so that realization happened about a year ago from today, where I said, okay, let's dig in. Let's dive into this. This is a thing you have to do. So let's dive in. And so luckily I found a mentor who knows how to play the game, plays it very well. Like you had just mentioned, we're working on an esports study, and he's structured in a way where it can be 3 papers, and even a paper about the structure of the survey tool, ethnographic typography. Like that's a whole nother paper in itself. And I would never have thought about doing it like that. But I do have a follow-up question about what you had said with the co-authors. So I think the best advice I could give Brandon too is someone that's just getting in is you need to find a good group of co-authors. And what you'll see is when you look at people, they routinely co-author with similar people on a lot of their studies. How do you go about finding that people? Is it just through your professional network? I mean, a lot of people lean on their PhD advisors. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's no one way to do it. I got lucky with just going on LinkedIn and finding the right professor who is willing to take a Zoom and throw me on a couple of papers, and now it snowballs from there. But I think that's something, when I looked at ticket sales and ticket research, your name is one that popped up. And so my thought is, I don't know this guy at all. I'm not at a big, I have an EDD. I don't have a PhD. I'm not at a big R1 or R2. I'm at a teaching institution. So why would someone like that even take a phone call with me to talk about this stuff? Now, in reality, you're a great guy and you probably would have. But the point is, like, that's a real, I think, block for most people, is being afraid to, reach out. And so how do you build that network? How do you find the co-authors? Because I've also read recently that it doesn't look great when you're a single author on a whole bunch of studies. It actually looks better when you do have some co-authors to give multiple perspectives and add experience and expertise.
Yeah, I think it's natural initially to want to partner with your advisor, mentor that you may have had through a PhD program, or if you were in that program with a couple of other students, it's pretty common to kind of collaborate with them initially as you all are first, finishing up and trying to get some papers published. And I would definitely recommend that. I've found over the years a couple of things. One, when I do go to conferences, I really push myself to try to go listen to other people present their research, even if it's someone I don't know, or it generally has to be a topic I'm interested in. But I've gone to ones where I don't know the authors, and I've come to regret some of those decisions. You get in stuck in a half-hour presentation, and I wish I could have got out of it. But occasionally I will listen to one and like, wow, that was really sharp. I really like some of those ideas, and then you can kind of spark those conversations that way. So trying to read what other people are doing or listen to other presentations, I think is really helpful in that regard. I also have found that for me, I'm kind of an ideas guy. I feel like that's a strength of mine. I am not a stats person. I understand statistics enough to know what I kind of want to get at, but I am not an expert in that area. I've collaborated with several people who are excellent at statistics and aren't necessarily great at the practical side of things. And that works out well because that's the element that I would bring to the table with them. I know I also have certain partners that I know are great at meeting deadlines and writing and getting after it. I know there are other people that are good, but they're going to take forever to finish a project. For me at UNC, I've had pressure to produce more, so I need to find people that work quickly and maybe have those other kind of pressures, whereas someone that doesn't, I can't wait around 2 years for this project to get done. I need it to get done in the next 6 months. So that's kind of forced me to find the right people for that fit as well. So those are a couple of things I've done. I'll give you a great example. I saw an article it's actually a couple of years ago that I thought was fascinating that started to look at AI use in ticket sales. And as I read the article, I was blown away by the statistics that were being used in it. I questioned what the purpose of the article was. And I immediately contacted the person who did that. And we've struck up a great friendship since then. And he said, I kind of struggle knowing what the practicality of some of this is, but I love working on AI. And he's a wizard at it. I'm just like, this guy is unbelievable. So we've had a really good collaboration that way because we feed off of each other's, strengths. It takes a little while to find those kind of people. And sometimes if you're in a department where you're the only person or you're one of two in that department, you got to kind of reach out to, some other areas there. But I think all of us are kind of in that same boat. We're all looking for collaborators. We're all looking for partners. There's a handful of us in this field that probably think we're a little better than everybody else, but I would like to think most of us are pretty reasonable and understand that we all have these kind of pressures and need to help each other out.
I have found that once you get people talking about their research, it's like, yeah, I do have something that you could help me out with. And that's part of the best advice I ever got from my mother was you don't ask, you don't get. So if you don't tell people you're looking to collaborate, then you can't expect them to just email you one day with opportunities. So the same is true with book chapters and all of these things. It's just, you have to establish a little bit of a network and let people know that that's a priority for you. And then all of a sudden they'll start looking out for ways to include you. The way you described it's almost like building a roster.
Real quick,
Yeah,
Nick, I was going to add one other thing. I do really appreciate when people come to the table with ideas rather than, hey, can I tack on to your project for this or that? And not, even if they're going to do work, sometimes I want that kind of help, but I have lots of students that want to help collect data, and I get that they don't really understand what, but if you're wanting to collaborate, how about bringing up a couple of ideas and I got some ideas and we can kind of work that way together. I think that ends up being more productive as well.
Absolutely. And I teach my students too, when you're networking, don't come with an ask, come with like offering some kind of value. Sure, it's okay to ask somebody for a meeting just to get some knowledge from them, but don't ask them for an internship. Try to solve a problem, try to add value, and sometimes it's as simple as saying like, hey, if you ever need anything, let me know and I'd be happy to help you out. So I completely agree with you. And I know probably the first couple times I reached out to people, I didn't know I had no value to add at that time, but I learned from that. And then, now it's like, hey, I have this idea. What do you think about this idea? And then we tackle it together. But it sounded like you kind of have a roster built, if you will, and you can plug in different players for different types of events and different games and go from there. So I think it's just about building up that roster and finding people that have different skill sets, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have certain ones that I'll call. And again, I don't mean to sound like all I do is research, but when I've had pressure to do this, I need different partners that can contribute different things at different times. Because if I just worked with the same people every single paper, the cycle doesn't move fast enough for me, if that makes sense. So I like to have different people that are in the different areas. And you never know, if you need different connections or you need different abilities to collect data. I have certain people I write with that they have access to graduate assistants. That's a huge benefit. I can bring up an idea and say, hey, can you use your GA to go collect this data off of these websites and pull all these statistics? And if they can do that, great. That's a huge, huge help.
So I know the path looks, you made a good point. Research isn't the only thing you do. You also teach and you're advising, mentoring students. What might that path look like for somebody who's just starting off in sport management as a faculty member? Like I started off as a teaching institution. Nick's there. And, we all have aspirations to, possibly get to that R1. I mean, you're at one of the premier institutions in the country there at North Carolina, but that doesn't just happen overnight. And everybody's path is different. I understand that. But, if you were saying, okay, if somebody's listening and says, I want to be the next Nels Popp, what's that path kind of look like for a student? I mean, you could start from the undergrad all the way to what you're doing now.
First of all, if that's your goal, you need to find better goals here. But I sort of stumbled into this professor idea and the dark side of academics here. I was planning on working in the industry. I had a chance to coach for a little while, and I worked overseas for a little while with a basketball club. I just started taking classes as a master's student. I didn't even know sport management was a degree field. And I started taking these classes. I'm like, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoy the discussion. And that kind of is what led me to go where I'm going. When I started my doctoral program, there were other people in that program that knew that's exactly what they wanted to do. They had wanted to do that since they started college. They knew what every professor had already been researching and studying and who they wanted to have them mentor. And I had no idea any of that. I kind of stumbled across things. So first of all, I just want to point out, if someone wants to go this route, I don't think you have to have it all mapped out. Yep. Because of my experience, I've always wanted to share that with other people who are trying to figure this thing out. There are certain benefits to this job. There are certain detractions from this job, and I'm happy to be honest and try to share as much as I can. I got really lucky when I finished my PhD program. My first job out was at Illinois State University, kind of a regional public school. It had a 3-3 class load, and the expectation was kind of one publication, one presentation a year. Kind of that perfect kind of middle ground of academic jobs, in my opinion. I think there are places where you got to teach 4 or 5 classes a semester. This wasn't that. There are places where you need to publish 4 or 5 papers a semester or a year, and this wasn't that. So it gave me a good chance to kind of feel out both sides of things. I liked the teaching. I thought it was a lot of fun. I would not want to teach chemistry. I would not want to teach history. I love teaching sport management. I think that's a lot of fun. But the more I did the research side of things, I'm like, this is pretty cool too, especially if you can start to get some attention from industry and people that really want to know, some of these, studies that you're looking at. So I tried to stay a little bit ahead of the game so that when an opportunity came to apply at a place like UNC, which is something I kind of had in the back of my mind, I wasn't coming in with the bare minimum. I wasn't publishing as much as they expect, but I was publishing more than what was expected at Illinois State.
Mm.
That allowed me to make the case that, look, if I have more time to do this, I can do this. If I had spent all my time at Illinois State just trying to squeak by, it probably doesn't enable me to apply and get hired at a place like UNC. And UNC or big R1s aren't the ideal spot for everyone. There's all kind of a whole range of things, and I don't expect everyone to want to do that. But if you want to go that route, to me, that made a lot of sense. I do see, we've had job vacancies here, and I've been on the search committee, and we get people straight out of a doc program. I don't always know that they know what they're getting themselves into by coming to a place like this. So it's nice to try to find someone with some experience, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I really appreciated being able to try some of both, the research side and the teaching side, to see where I really fit. Would I go to a place where I just taught all the time and didn't have to worry about research? I don't think that would be miserable. I would be fine with that, but I do really like the research component to it. So I really enjoy that I get to do that more.
Amazing how many guests we've had who started in coaching and then come into sport management, kind of like we did.
Well, I resonate so much with that because I'm at a place where there's zero expectation to do research. And so we just published today our faculty research booklet. And it's just like all of a sudden, because I tried for 1 year, now I actually am in the booklet with the other majors that's more of a priority. But we have a 4-in-4 course load, and then we all teach overload, and there's really no time or funding for it. So it's really just a matter of what are your life goals. And to be honest, I don't know what that is yet. I don't think an R1 is the answer because I don't want the pressure of a young family and also grant funding and all of these things. But I do like the mix like you do. I do like the idea of, all right, there's some expectation of scholarly work and teaching. And so it's all about finding that fit. And, I've looked at a lot of R2s and, it is a good mix at an R2 is what I've learned. It's a very fair mix of what it is. And it's something for everybody.
One thing I've also learned is that if you teach the same classes I've been doing this now for 15 years, I like our field because it is constantly evolving and changing, but there are also some things that kind of stay the same. Research to me allows me to always have something new and different. Obviously, I try to change up my classes and do some different exercise and stuff, but you teach the same class for 10 years straight every semester, there are some things that you probably get a little tired of talking about and explaining. To me, there's some real enjoyment out of the research side of things. Here's something that's relatively cutting edge in our field. This is something that, not a lot of people understand, and I can actually be quoted in a newspaper article as an expert in this area. There's something that's dynamic and fun about that too.
There was a new feeling of joy this past semester when I had done some research, published it, and then was able to reference my own research in class. Because that was brand new. Like that research was brand new. And it was the first time I taught that class 3 times before. And now being able to be like, actually, you know what? This isn't just, I'm not just citing random people I've never met before. I can actually tell you, like, based on my own firsthand experience, this is true. Like I can confirm this on my own. And that was the students probably could have cared less. They're like, oh yeah, good for him. But they could tell I was happy. But
two things with that, Nick. One, I still remember when I first saw my name on someone else's poster that they had cited me. That was the first time I'd ever seen that. That was a real thrill. So you got that to look forward to.
Yep.
But I will also say, going back to Brandon's question way at the beginning, like, where do you come up with ideas and what's important? A lot of good research are things that I've, you know, had questions about, or I'll bring up in class and say, would it be better to do this or this? And if this class can't really come to a consensus, I'm like, that's a good research idea. We should
Mm,
actually talk about that. We
And
should,
that's where you wish you have GAs,
yeah.
because then you can have a lot of these, like you said, you can have all these different projects kind of at different stages and have some help with it. I think that's the hard part right now for someone like Brandon or myself. We're like, we're not getting paid to do any research at the moment. So we have to carve out time, and maybe it's one or two projects going at a time. And like you mentioned, it's about doing more than the bare minimum of where we're at so that we can maybe get to where we want to be. Because like you said, they don't necessarily need you to produce at that level that, for me, like University of Michigan, right? I live 20 minutes from campus, and they don't need to see me getting it'd be great, $1 million grants and producing 8 papers a year or anything like that. But they need to know that you have the skill set and the ability to do that if you were asked to. And it's hard to prove that if you don't have anything. And so you need something. So we talked to a lot of people at teaching institutions on this podcast, and I think that's the best advice that we could give is just stay involved and do something, because you never know where it'll take you, or what opportunity it'll give you, even if it turns out like you're perfectly happy where you're at. I mean, if I were to never leave Madonna, I would just be a superstar for having 2 things a year.
yep.
I did a textbook chapter this year. Wow, you're doing more than most. So it's just like there's benefits no matter where you're at. But yeah, I resonate with that. And I think that the game's actually pretty consistent across the board. You just need to, like I said, learn those rules and figure out how to play that game.
Yeah, for sure. And I also, it's like what we tell our students all the time. You don't want to work for your favorite team. You want to get a job in sports because it's something you're passionate about. There's some,
Yep.
whether it's, communication or writing or whatever it is that you really like, find a job that allows you to do that. I think the same is true in this discussion that we just had, that what is it that you really like doing? Not, I need to go work for this institution, but if you love teaching, then be happy at a teaching institution. That's what the nature of the job is. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, I'm not saying we on this podcast, but we in the field need to just say, like, what is it that we really, having worked in sports for 10 years, I really value the work-life balance of academia.
Yep.
It drives me
Yep.
nuts when I hear other professors like, this is crazy. I can't believe how much time we spend doing this. Are you kidding? I was an SID with 22 sports, and I was the only SID. I spent every single
Yeah.
weekend doing stats. Like, no, this is a great gig. It's a good job. So it's just kind of understanding what's important to us personally, instead of you got to keep an eye on what else is happening and what other opportunities are out there, but also being able to say, like, what makes me happy? That's what I want to do. I want to go after that kind of position.
Had
Yep.
that conversation
And
with my dean, I think this past week, because we're getting ready to roll out an undergrad program and we got the masters and we got all this. She said, "Are you doing okay with the workload?" I'm like, I worked in baseball for years, I'm like, 80-hour weeks compared to working remote 40. Yeah, but all right. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Exactly.
did want to ask you, as we start to kind of wrap things up, I know, again, we've talked about on the business side, revenue development, college athletics. Where do you see research going here in the next 5 or 10 years in sport management? Because I'm watching, March Madness right now and everything going on. I mean, people are now decrying the lack of min majors.
parity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because of NIL and the transfer portal. So, if you had to kind of look into your crystal ball, what do you think we're going to be researching here for the next decade?
Well, I feel pretty safe in saying that it's always going to be about revenue to
Yeah.
some degree. Certain organizations more than others. So I feel like that's a big component. I do think about at different times, like, is AI going to uh, decimate what we do as researchers?
Mm. Yep.
There's a lot of things that you still have to come up with the idea, but AI can now do it in the time that it took me to, months to do. It makes me think about that side a little bit as well. Um, I do think there are always going to be underfunded sport organizations. It's probably not going to be the Boston Celtics. It's probably going to be college athletics. It's probably going to be minor league sports. It might be youth sports. So to me, there's always going to be fertile ground to look at issues that are relevant to those organizations that, even though we're high profile organizations in sports, we're not wealthy organizations in sports compared to other industry sectors. And so I think when you have that, there's always going to be a need for research. That's actually one of the things that I get a little disappointed in at times is college athletics has this amazing resource right in their backyard in students, faculty, people that are experts in statistical analysis and business and all these other areas. That should be a resource we should be using. And so to me, that there's a lot of ground in that regard. I will give our AD and our former chancellor here a ton of credit. They actually called myself and one of our other sport admin professors up a couple of years ago. They were thinking about starting alcohol sales in the football stadium. And they actually asked us, would you tell us if this is a smart move or not? Will you conduct research on our behalf to try to figure out and answer this question? Like, yes, I love the idea that our athletic department went to us to kind of conduct some research on their behalf. So I think as long as we provide value, we're going to find spots. Again, my area is more sales, revenue, ticket sponsorship. Fundraising is a huge one, development that I think is underserved by research. And I think the reason why is because pro sports doesn't have it. Pro sports they don't want a lot of our research because they're doing their own. They have BI staffs that's what they look at. But college athletics is a little unique in that they don't have as robust of data analysts, and particularly because fundraising development is a specialized area within college athletics. I think there's a ton of room for research in that area it's underserved right now. And that's going to be with NIL and everything, that's going to be a very important area for our industry, at least in the near future.
Well, Dr. Popp, we really appreciate you being on the show. This is great to learn more about research, the process, and what you're doing. And if anybody's listening, please feel free to message us on Spotify or through YouTube if you have questions or want to reach out. And we're happy to direct those to Dr. Popp, or if you have questions about the show, let us know. But again, Dr. Popp, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Nick, man. That was awesome.